Michael Kroger is a former president of the Victorian Liberal Party for a long time. He has been one of the foundation stones, one of the pillars upon which Liberal Party power has been built in Victoria. He has had a spectacular falling out with his friend Peter Costello. Michael Kroger, good morning to you.
John, good morning.
What happened with you and Peter?
Well, look, John, after 35 years of being Peter's best friend, ally and supporter, even I've had enough. Even I'm at my wit's end with Peter. And there comes a point where, people have to move on. Peter made a decision in 2007, I think the wrong decision, to split the dummy and leave the parliament. He should have stayed. He should have been opposition leader. He would have been Prime Minister. OK, he didn't want to do that. He left. Fair enough. He'd made a great contribution. He was Australia's and is our greatest ever treasure. No one will ever take that away from him. But for 5 years, he's been like a bear with a terribly sore head, with a migraine headache, attacking everyone and sundry. So people have just had enough of all this criticism.
People being...
Well, people in the Liberal Party. We're sick of him attacking John Howard. Everywhere he goes, he says, no, Howard's no good. He refuses to appear anywhere with John Howard. Now, Howard was a great Prime Minister, right? He was a great... We could never get the numbers against John Howard because Howard was too good, too popular, too great. Peter could never challenge John because John had 2/3 or 3/4 of the parliamentary party. But Peter's got to make up with John. It was years ago now. He's got to say Howard was great. He never acknowledges Howard publicly. He never says anything gracious about John.
Well, famously, they never had dinners together. They never dined together. Have they appeared together at all since the election loss?
They haven't appeared at all. Since 2007, John and Peter have never appeared. Now, this is ridiculous and absurd, and Peter has to make up with John. I'll give you an example. In late 2010, I said to Kelly O'Dwyer, the member for Higgins, let's hold a fundraiser in Higgins on the 15th anniversary of the election of John's government, which would be March 2011, 15 years. I said, Kelly, we could get 100 people at probably $5,000 a head, John. We could have probably raised $500,000, and I said, let's get John Howard and Peter Costello together, key billing in Higgins to celebrate this great anniversary. So I said, I'll ring John Howard, you ring Peter. She said, can you ring Peter? I said, no, you ring Peter. So I rang Mr Howard and I said, I actually had lunch with him in Sydney at the end of 2010, and I said, John, would you appear at this fundraiser? And he said, of course.
In Melbourne?
No, it was going to be in Melbourne. He was going to come to Melbourne. I had lunch with John in Sydney.
At a private residence, but invitation only.
Yeah, exactly. But 100 people at 5,000 a head. And John said, of course I'll appear. For you, for Kelly, for the party. He said, will Peter appear with me? I said, well, we're finding out. I hope so, Prime Minister. So I hope so, John. So then I went back to Kelly. I said, is Peter going to appear? She said, no. So I rang Peter. I said, Peter, for goodness sake.
This is before you had your falling out.
Of course.
Was that December?
This is 2010, end
Yep.
of 2010. But
Okay.
This is one example I'm giving you of Peter's petty-mindedness, small-mindedness. I said, this is for John. This is not for John or me. This is for Kelly. This is for the Liberal Party. We will raise Kelly's entire election budget in one night. Peter wouldn't appear with John and won't appear with him. Now, this is absurd. Why do I not talk to Peter much these days? Because, as all of his ex-friends know, lunch with Peter is an agony. It's a nightmare. You sit there and listen to him unload on Howard. He's not gracious about John. Alexander Downer was a great foreign minister. He's got to make up with Alexander. Downer is at ease with the world. He and Peter and John were the troika that led that government. Peter's got to stop criticising Tony Abbott. He is not an economic illiterate. He's a Rhodes Scholar, for God's sake. This man was a Rhodes Scholar, Abbott. He's got to stop criticising Alan Stockdale and Malcolm Turnbull and Robert Doyle and Michael Ronaldson and John Hewson and Andrew Peacock and party people like Jason Aldworth and Helen Kroger. The list goes on and on. The Kemp brothers, the list goes on and on. Peter has to move on. He's got to move on and stop bagging everybody, including me.
One or the other, he's denied having had this meeting with you, or at this meeting having said he wants to go back into federal politics.
I've read that.
You say he did say that, and he was looking at whose seat he could take.
Correct.
He says it's absolute nonsense. So one or the other of you is not telling the truth.
Or he puts a different interpretation of what he said. Right? I don't drink, and I'm not suggesting he drank too much of that lunch, but I've got a very clear focus. I know what happened. I know the date. I know where it was. It was in Melbourne. It was in late October.
At a restaurant or a club?
Well, it was at a club. It was at a club in Melbourne.
One of the private Melbourne clubs, Australian
Melbourne
club,
clubs.
one
Yes.
of those?
Well, I can't say which club it was at, but it was just P&I. There's 100 people in the room, for goodness sake. And the lunch went on, and as Peter usually does, he's got this criticism of Howard and all his former colleagues.
Was it just sort of, I wish I still had another go, wish I was still there? Was it just a toss-away line?
Peter is one of these people I give Jeff great credit.
Jeff Kennett.
He's, he doesn't say, "Oh, Ted Bailey, it would have been better if I were there." Jeff's moved on. He helps Ted in any way he can. Peter doesn't seek to help Tony Abbott at all. He didn't seek to help Malcolm Turnbull at all. Peter was...
He's doing a fundraiser this morning for the Higgins Club.
Yeah, for Kelly, his local staffer. I mean, the Liberal Party's bigger than Peter's former staffers. There's more people to help than former staffers. We've got some brilliant new people in the Liberal Party federally. Frydenberg, Tudge, Dan T, and there's a lot of great new... And there'll be some good ones coming in the next election. But Peter has got to, stop at criticising all... I mean, I fell out... One of the reasons I fell out years ago, Malcolm Turnbull rang me and others and said, "I'm new leader, I don't know many people in Victoria. Would you be a sounding board?" I said, "Malcolm, of course I would be." Well, when I told Peter this, he said, "Hey, didn't like that. Why are you helping Turnbull? Why does John Howard say nice things about you, Michael, in his book?" I said, "Well, because I used to be friendly with John Howard, Peter." "Oh, well, you didn't like that." I mean, he's got to move on and repair these relationships with people that were part of one of the great governments of our time.
We asked Peter Costello to speak to us yesterday. He declined the invitation, but he's quoted in the newspaper as saying, "I wouldn't share a confidence with Michael Kroger."
Well, he's been sharing confidences with me since 1975.
But no longer. He doesn't trust you anymore.
Well, obviously not since that lunch, not since the other day. I started to fall out with Peter a few years ago when I kept saying, when he was unhappy about me trying to help Malcolm Turnbull. Now, John, when a new leader rings you, and Malcolm tried to got some sounding boards in each state. People, he just rang. I think Malcolm Turnbull rang me 5 times when he was leader, that's all, to say, "How does this issue play in Victoria?" It's quite a clever thing to do, not because he rang me, but because he decided to ask people who might know what was happening in your local patch. But no, that wasn't, so he didn't like me talking to Turnbull. He never liked the fact that I repaired my relationship with John Howard after the 2007 election, because he refuses to speak to John. I mean, Peter has got to repair relationship with these people, and when I'm at my wit's end with him, John, this is the Kroger of the Kroger Costello faction. When I'm at my wit's end with him, that should tell you something. No, I don't want to have lunch with Peter anymore. I don't want to deal with him anymore. I've been apologising for him and defending him for 35 years, and it's time for him to bury the hatchet with all these people.
Then there's the analysis that says this is all just payback because the people who he recruited to politics, the people who represent his strand of thinking in the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party, are turning on the people who are loyal to you and your way of thinking in the Liberal Party.
No, I read that.
This is payback over your ex-wife's being dumped down the pecking order on the Senate ticket and also the pre-selection fight over Corangamite.
Yep, I perfectly understand that. Now,
well, is it accurate?
No, it's completely inaccurate. There was nothing wrong with the pre-selection, the way it was conducted. Scotty Ryan and Mitch Fifield got 1 and 2 in a perfectly legitimate pre-selection. David Kemp introduced some new reforms to the party, which are great. It means instead of 50 people at a pre-selection, we have 400 or 500. So it's a much more... I wish I'd thought of the idea when I was president 20 years ago, but it's a great idea. It gets more and more people involved in this great voluntary organisation, which you need. They won square and fair. No one's got to complain about the process. My concern was, why start a fight over the second and third positions on the Senate ticket when every poll published since 2010 says we're going to win 3.5 positions? So the pre-selection was held. Scotty and Mitch Fifield, who are really good people, won fair and square. No one had a complaint about it. My concern was, why pick a fight when you don't need to? Enemies accumulate in politics. Don't make enemies if you don't need to. But what happened was, everything had sort of been buried until this absurd nonsense on Tuesday, where on the day of the budget, when Craig Thompson's on his knees and Peter Slipper's on his knees, the government's on their knees, a couple of senators decide to continue this unnecessary fight against Helen Kroger. And of course I'd go to a pre-selection and defend my former wife. Of course you would. It's the proper thing to do. She's the mother of 2 of my beautiful children, and I think she's done a great job. I think she helped Ted Bailey win the 2010 election with her comments on the Greens. But we have this stupid, absurd thing on Tuesday where on the day of the budget, a couple of senators decided it's a good idea to challenge the Senate whip's position and cause a national fight. Well, how clever is that? How clever was that?
How clever is it for you to be coming out and stirring the pot? There's something strategic about you deciding to break your silence this morning as well.
The reason is someone has to put a stop to Peter's attacking, wherever he goes, other great figures in the Liberal Party. He doesn't like Hewson, he doesn't like Turnbull, he's never been all that friendly with my former father-in-law, the great Andrew Peacock. He doesn't like John Howard, he doesn't like Alexander Downer. He's been publicly critical of Tony Abbott, calling him a DLP stooge and an economic illiterate. Now, you make your mind up. I think Howard is magnificent. I think Downer was a great foreign minister. I think Malcolm Turnbull, we're lucky to have Malcolm Turnbull, a brilliant, successful businessman. He didn't succeed as leader because Malcolm wasn't in politics long enough, early enough in life to understand how the game properly worked, and I and many others disagreed with him on the ETS. But we're very lucky to have Malcolm Turnbull. Andrew Peacock, of course, was one of the greatest figures in the history of the party. John Hewson made a great contribution whilst he was there. I mean, he's got to stop this war against all of these people. So is this about payback for the Senate? No, what has happened? This has arisen because of that. But it's time to stop this campaign against all these other great figures in the Liberal Party. Peter was a magnificent treasurer. I was proud to be his close friend and ally for a long time.
His confidant.
His confidant for 35 years.
His right-hand man.
I've got 1,000 Peter Costello confidences, which I've never broken and wouldn't. But on this occasion, on this occasion, because I think Peter's got to a stage where people in the Liberal Party that you know, it's in every conversation I have with people in the federal parliament and around the federal party, people say, "How's Peter?" And I say, "Well, he's like a bear with a sore head," and they go, "Yeah, well, we know." And every time we speak to him, he starts on Howard and everybody else, and people are just over it, John.
Okay, so it's more than relevance deprivation, you say. It was how serious, though? I want to get back to this actual lunch at one of the clubs.
Yeah, I diverted. Yes, no, exactly.
How serious a strategy was it to make a comeback? You say it wasn't just a flippant throwaway remark. It wasn't a one-liner. It was a clear strategy to take back one of the Victorian Plum seats. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what happened.
Which seat? So far we've heard suggestions of Frydenberg's seat, Tudge's seat. Well, several have been mentioned.
The first seat was mentioned was Josh Frydenberg. Now,
Kooyong.
Frydenberg is an absolute star in the making who went to his pre-selection with references from John Howard and Andrew Peacock. Given the historical divide in the party between those two, here's a bloke who can get both of them to give him a reference. That's all you need to know about Frydenberg. And I said, Peter, I know Josh, but not very well. I certainly wouldn't know him well enough to say to him, "Hey, mate, would you give your seat away that you've just won?" And I certainly wouldn't even raise it with him. The guy's a star. So then there was reference to the other new seats, and I said, "Well, I don't know Dan Tehan and Alan Tudge at all. I've only probably said 5 words to them in my life.
There was a serious proposal to tap them on the shoulder and say, give way for Costello to make a comeback."
Correct. And I said, "Listen, Peter, if you want me to do that," because, you know, I've done many things for Peter over 3.5 decades, John. I said, "Listen, I'm happy to ring Kelly O'Dwyer or Tony Smith, who are 2 of his former staffers." And he said, "Don't ring my former staffers." I said, "Well, why would Josh Frydenberg or any of the other fellows listen to me?" So anyway, I said, "No, that's ridiculous." Now, later on, a couple of months later, one of the members of his staff rang me to say, have a go at me for what I'd said at lunch. So that member knows this. You know, these discussions took place. I've told a number of people about this. I told a former cabinet minister in confidence, or former minister, I think in January, about it. And I said, "Mate, Peter's just not handled this well."
So this was not just a throwaway?
No, it's not a throwaway line.
And did it go any further than the two of you talking it over?
We haven't spoken since.
Has he taken it any further
No,
that you've heard
not
through?
that I'm aware. No, he can't. He always did things through me. The Kroger-Costello faction, you know, I finished as president, John, I'll put this on the record, right, because I'm sick of reading about it. I finished as president in 1992, before Jeff Kennett was elected. That's how long ago it was that I was president.
But you've continued to exercise power and influence.
My influence is only because I was Peter's best friend. It wasn't the Kroger-Costello. I didn't need a faction. Why did I need a faction? The reason our grouping existed was to try and get good people into Parliament who might support Peter for the Prime Ministership. So it finished in 2007, and thank God for that. It finished in 2007.
Okay, I've got to move on. I've got Simon Crean waiting to speak, and apparently Tony Abbott's going to call in as well. This whole class war issue that's playing out between the government and the opposition at the moment deserves some scrutiny as well. But finally, Michael Kroger, are you interested in a reconciliation with Peter Costello, or is, as far as you're concerned, is this it? You're burning the bridges?
Look, I'm at a stage, John, where the answer is, of course, yes. My only role these days, really, I think I've been to 3 pre-selections in 15 years. That's how much role I've played. One was the Senate.
But do you want a reconciliation?
I've just said I'm happy to reconcile with anybody.
Well, talking to me in the terms you have this morning is not exactly a gesture towards reconciliation.
Well, I think there's more important things than my reconciliation with Peter. I think it's more important for these things to be on the record so people know exactly what's been going on. I think it's important for people to know that, we have to do everything we can to support the leadership of the party we've got now federally and not criticise them around the traps.
So if someone rang you and said, come on, this is ridiculous, let's sort this out, you and Peter need to sit down and have lunch again
Well,
together.
It's probably not going to be tomorrow. But is it a big issue in life? No, it's not a big issue in life. A big issue in life is the people that are there now should be allowed to run the party, as Ted should be allowed to run the Senate, the state, Tony should be allowed to run the federal party, and we all move on.
Because implicit in all of this is that Peter Costello thinks Tony Abbott's not good enough.
Well, he's made criticisms of Tony, which I utterly and totally reject. I mean, the fellow is a Rhodes Scholar, for God's sake. To say he's an economic illiterate, he's a Rhodes Scholar, John. So I wasn't within a bull's roar of being a Rhodes Scholar. The bloke is a highly intelligent, gifted Australian, and he'll be a great Prime Minister. There's no point publicly saying the guy doesn't understand economics. He sat in the Howard Cabinet for 10 years, approving all the economic decisions. He was a part of every budget from the day he got into Cabinet onwards.
And I better get a wriggle on because he's going to be talking to us shortly as well. As always, Michael Kroger, thank you very much for joining us here this morning in the
studio.
studio.
John, thank you, pleasure.
And I hope that's helped you to get all that off your chest as well.
Well, I hope it's helped people understand what is going on. And if we can put this to bed and move on, we'd all be the